What's up, Cleftones? This is Darren from CleftoneGrooves.com. I am back with part 2 in this video series of how to have amazing interviews. So, last week we talked about how we can first start off by doing that by having automation in our process for making sure that we don't have microphone bleed and things of that nature when we are doing our editing. So again, just a quick review. Last week we talked about while someone else is speaking, when you have multiple microphones, you turn up their microphone, but at the same time, the other person who isn't speaking, you turn down their microphone, thereby getting rid of some of that roomy sound from the other microphone, picking that person up who's speaking from across the room. And so this week, what I want to cover with you is how we can further take that sound to an even better state. And what we're going to do today is discuss EQ and compression and why that is so important to having better audio. So I already have taken the liberty from last week of going ahead and finishing out the automation here. And I am on my Windows machine because I am having some issues with Camtasia on my Mac this week. So sorry if it kind of throws you off, but yes, I'm on a Windows machine this particular time. And I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into this because we have a lot of information to cover today. So first of all, I want to bring your attention to the end of this recording. You'll notice, again, last week we talked about fades and how those can help smooth out your sound and have it where there's no abrupt cutting off or abrupt loudness or any kind of a noise that just kind of happens out of nowhere from a track. So again, this is another way in Studio One that you can fade your files. Basically clicking on the region like I just did and grabbing the handle here and drawing in a fade. And the reason that we do that at the end of our files is simply because you don't want where, maybe someone is getting ready to say something else after the actual recording is done. So you cut all that stuff off, but then maybe you still hear the end of the room tone just kind of cut off. You want that to kind of ease its way out, right? So that's what I did here. And we talked briefly about kind of crossfading things last week. Now, this is a true crossfade here. This is where I had to edit out part of the interview. It looks like maybe there was a bit of a blip or a stubble or a stumble over some words here. And so basically, I just cut out that section, and then I drew in a fade on the section where it ended, and then where it began, I drew in a fade in. So now you have a nice crossfade, and that's nice and smooth as well. And that's the other thing I want to bring your attention to. At the very beginning of the track here, you'll notice that I have a fade in here as well. So it's the same thing. Your fade ins, your fade outs, you want things nice and smooth. That is a good sign of professional audio editing at work right there. Making sure that you don't scare people half to death with sudden noises or things that just drop out and people say, well, hey, where did the noise go? Or where did that go? So anyway, enough of talking about those little things now. We're going to jump into EQ, equalization, and why that is so important. Now, your equalizer in your DAW, which I happen to be using Studio One, your EQ is kind of like a chisel in the hands of a sculptor. When you're getting ready to sculpt a statue and you have your tools, you're going to have your hammer and your chisel. That's kind of what like EQ can be for your audio. It's that chisel to help you bring out the diamond in the rough, so to speak. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use that. But first, let's just go ahead and take a listen to the audio just to get a refresher from last week so we know just what we're dealing with here. Let's just take a listen and see what state the audio is in. So here we go.
I'm here, and next on the CD, we have none other than Corey, the builder, Corey Briggs. Corey, welcome.
Man, thank you very much, Dr. West. A pleasure to be here.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
Okay, so just listening to the first few seconds of that, I notice in Ruben's track, and now there's obviously some things to work on with Corey's track, but mainly in Ruben's track here, if you listen carefully, you'll notice it kind of has, for lack of a better term, kind of a telephone sound. Not so much an exact telephone sound effect, but kind of that muffled quality of a telephone. If you listen, it just sounds like it's not as clear as it should be. And let me just play that back again.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call.
So again, also what I'm hearing there is maybe a little bit of a boxiness to Ruben's sound. It sounds like he might be a little bit in a box. So what I'm going to go ahead and do on my Studio One DAW here is press number 3 of the numbers that are right above the letters on the keyboard. And I'm just going to go ahead and look at the track here. So I already have some EQs and things that I've done. I've actually already edited this file, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave these turned off for now. And I'm going to show you how we can put a new EQ onto the track. So I'm going to hit number 5 in the same area of the keyboard right above the letters. And that opens up our plugin area. So now I'm going to go ahead and go down to Pro EQ. This is one that I really like to use. I think this comes with Studio One Artist and above. If you get Studio One Prime, I don't think you get Pro EQ, but I really, really like this EQ a lot. I like how it does the processing of the sound, and it's very easy to use. Again, everything that PreSonus does, they make their stuff very intuitive. I'm like a cheerleader for PreSonus, I tell you, but they really bring it out of me. Anyway, we're going to use this EQ, and the first thing that I'm going to tell you is that when you're using EQ on dialogue, there's really not a whole lot of reason to have a lot of low end, because one of the things, just to give you a little insider behind the scenes view, we recorded this interview in a hotel room. And so a lot of times when you're in a building like that, you're going to have a lot of low-end rumble from air conditioning. You're going to have, maybe some of the people, the workers there were rolling carts in the hallways. All that low-end rumble, all that energy happens down here in that bass area. Well, we don't need all of that just to hear Ruben's voice. So the first thing I'm going to do to just instantly clean up the sound is I'm going to select the low pass filter, or I'm sorry, the high pass filter low cut. Same difference. And what I selected here was how hard of a knee that I wanted that to come in. So if I chose like 6, notice it's a gentle slope. But you know what? I just cut it all off, as much as I can. And for male vocals, usually 75 hertz is pretty safe. You can go up maybe to 80. It just depends on the person's voice. Women's voices, you can do even more aggressive cut on the high pass, 100, 120 hertz. That actually might be a little bit too high. But basically, you want to do a low cut all the way up until the point where their voice starts to sound unnatural, because again, you want them to sound the same, right? So what I'm going to do is just kind of sweep this up until I hear where it's really starting to affect Ruben's voice, and then I'm going to back it off just a little bit so that I can have still some of his naturalness in the recording. So let me go ahead and just do that really quick.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call.
So I noticed as soon as I started getting into the 90 hertz area, where it really, you could barely hear it. But of course, if you haven't been using your ears as long as I have, you probably didn't hear what I heard. But it started to sound a little thin, so I backed it off. I think I'm going to stay with 83 hertz here. Now, the other quality I notice about Ruben's voice, remember I told you earlier, it sounds like he's kind of maybe in a box, and that he has a little bit of that telephone sound going on, that telephony sound. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to tell you, first of all, with EQ, I always prefer to cut the EQ first rather than boost it, because in the end, if you're cutting your EQ, then that means you're still saving headroom here on your master channel when you go to master your audio, and you'll have space to be able to turn your audio up. So a good rule of thumb, or a good starting place with EQ is cut before you boost. So that's what I'm going to do here. But now that I've just told you that, I'm going to do the opposite. And the reason why I'm going to boost is simply because I want to find the frequency that sounds the most offensive to me. Now, right now, it sounds like it could be in the 500 hertz to 600 hertz range where I'm hearing some of that telephone kind of sound. So what I'm going to do to really make it stand out, and pardon the terrible audio, but I'm going to boost the frequency, and then notice what I just did here. I adjusted the Q. The Q, what this is here is you control how much of the frequency spectrum you want to affect. So a really tight Q or a really wide Q. Now, if we're trying to isolate a certain frequency and find out which one sounds the worst, we obviously don't want to affect the whole frequency spectrum. So I'm going to give this a tight Q, but I'm going to widen it out just a little bit because usually wherever you find those frequencies that need to be cut, the surrounding frequencies around them also need that same attention. So now what I'm going to do is listen, and I'm going to take my frequency knob here and just kind of sweep through the spectrum to listen to where I can find the most offensive sound, and then I'm going to cut it. So this might be a little annoying, but bear with me.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
I think like most.
Now, here's what I know, Corey.
Okay, so it sounds pretty nasty right there in the 300 to 400 hertz range, 393 hertz to be exact. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is bring this down about minus, it sounds like there's a lot there. So normally I wouldn't go more than 6 in most cases, but sometimes, hey, you got to do what you got to do. So I'm going to go -7. And then the other thing is I'm going to widen this Q back out. So I'm going to say 1. Now notice how that widened it out to affect the surrounding frequencies. And so just thinking about where this is, I think I'm going to go ahead and boost this, or not boost it, but go to a little bit higher frequency because I don't want to take out too much of his low end on his voice. So what I'm going to do is bring this up to say about 425 because that's still really close and in that region. And let me listen and see what it sounds like now with this cut.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call.
Okay, so that made a difference as far as how clear Ruben sounds. He sounds much clearer. And don't worry, we'll do a comparison once we get done making our other moves. I'm still hearing some sound maybe in the 700 to 800 range. So let me go ahead and just kind of get a starting place here. Again, a nice little tight Q here. And same method, we're going to sweep.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up.
Okay, so that frequency sounded pretty nasty as well. I'm going to go ahead and just say, -3. Actually, let's go, you know what, let's go -4. Let's get a little aggressive with it. And the same thing here, I'm probably going to go 1 for the Q on that. And let's go ahead and take care of some of that boxy sound. So a lot of your boxiness is going to come from, say, around the 200 to 250 range. So I'm going to say 215 to start. Same thing. And this time, I don't want to affect too much of the low end, so I'm not going to set the Q at 1 once I make my cut. I'm probably going to keep it fairly narrow just once I find the frequency that is the most offensive. So let me go ahead and turn this up, boost it, and let's find that frequency.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
I think like most of.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized.
Okay, so 194. That seems to be where it is. So I'm going to drop that by just 2, because again, I don't want to cut too much from Ruben's low end. And I'm only going to set the Q at about 3. Actually, let's make that about 4. A little bit tighter. And a habit of mine, always, always, always save my work often. You never know when you might have a power outage or something like that. So Control S, or on the Mac, Command S. Okay, so let me just go ahead and listen to this. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is bypass. Actually, you know what? Before we do that comparison, one of the other things I like to do is add just a nice little touch of sizzle on the high end just to add a little bit of that clarity. and I come down to anywhere from 5 to 7 kilohertz on the top end, and usually no more than 2. Again, it's a very conservative move. I hope you're seeing all these moves here I'm making are small moves, but they add up to huge results in the end. So again, no more than 2 hertz. Now, these over here, you notice they affected all the frequency ranges in peaks because they're set for peaks, right? But this one is automatically set to shelf, which is fine by me because I want everything past 5 kilohertz to have a nice high-end boost to it. So that's why I'm going to leave this as shelf. And now, let's take a listen. First, I'm going to bypass it. We'll hear the old way. And then I'll unbypass and see if you can hear the difference. I think you will.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
One more time.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
Notice how much cleaner and clearer that sounded. Okay, so now the next thing that we're going to do is we have to replace the volume that we lost. So yes, your EQ, remember we talked about cutting before boosting, and one of the things that happens as you cut your frequencies is that you will lose some of your volume. So again, now that we've cleaned it up, what we're bypassing here to listen for is how much louder the original is versus our nice EQ'd clean sound. So let's take a listen and see if we can figure out how much output gain we need to put back to get the level to match.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up.
So it's much louder. I'm going to guess right about 2.75 decibels. And that's just because I feel like a 2.75 kind of guy right now. But anyway, let's go ahead and bypass, and we'll listen to it bypassed and unbypassed.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and answer the call. Tell us about that point.
So notice here how with using our ears, we were able to find pretty close to where that volume needed to get put back to. Now, another tip in Studio One, if you want to do that, is you can use the level meter and bring that onto the track. And basically, as you play the track back, let me just go ahead and tack this onto the screen so when I open up my EQ, that doesn't go away. Now, let's go ahead and play Ruben's track back, and now you can watch this level meter.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realize.
So it looks like we're peaking about minus 9.75 here. So now let's bypass and see what we come up with.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wake up and.
So relatively the same output, as you can tell here, came in about minus 9.12. So again, when your ears are trained, you can come in pretty close and do that. So that's just a nice little reassurance. I would not recommend using this as a crutch because you can get into the dangerous habit of mixing with your eyes. But again, this is audio. You listen with your ears. Your eyes cannot hear. They only see. So I will always say, don't mix with your eyes, mix with your ears. But this can be a nice little tool for insurance, as you just saw how I used it, just to kind of compare when I bypassed and unbypassed, just to check my levels. Anyway, that's a little bit about EQ. And now here's a really cool feature in Studio One. Now I've already set this EQ for Ruben. So, I could come back over here and I could drag an EQ to Corey's track. Or what I could do is I could just drag it from here. And now I've kind of got a starting point. But again, the other thing to think about is Corey sounds totally different from Ruben. So he might have some other things going on with his recording that would need to be adjusted. So again, it's all about using your ears and listening to that sound. And let me just go ahead and just do a quick EQ with Corey. Since you kind of know the method now of how you can dial in that really, really nice sound. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do a fresh EQ. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard for Windows, or it's Command on the Mac. And as you click on things, the different knobs and controls here in Studio One, it will return them all to default. So I'm just going to return everything to default and start fresh here, because I just want to do it that way so as not to confuse you. So again, that was Control click, and that's for any command or any control, by the way, in Studio One, whether that's your fader, whether that's a setting on another plugin. Just hold Control, it'll return it to its default state. Okay, so now we're going to listen to Corey. And again, since we've been through the whole EQ process now, I'm just going to go really quick, listen to his voice, and see where I can make some cuts.
I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
Yeah.
But I had a young lady looking at me, and I'm telling her to be everything she can be and live her best life. So it was more to be done if I was going to set the best example for my daughter.
Exactly.
I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
Yeah.
But I had a young lady looking at me, and I'm telling her to be everything she can be and live her best life. So it was more to be done if I was going to set the best example for my daughter. I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
Yeah.
But I had a young lady looking.
Okay, so that was a very, very quick EQing job, but notice the difference as I was bypassing.
I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40.
So the difference here is, Corey also had a little bit of that telephony sound to his voice in his recording. So again, I made a cut here, what I felt comfortable with. Notice I went down -10. I wasn't even looking at the numbers, but yeah, I cut -10. And now the thing is, you don't want to cut too much, because you can also get people sounding very thin if you cut too much. So I might give Corey just a little bit of that mid-range back and go from there. But I got him where I kind of feel comfortable with the sound of his voice for right now. So that's EQ for you guys. Now let's take a look at compression. And actually, you know what? Just for fun, let's look at my EQ that I just did here today versus what I did on my original mix for Ruben. Let's just take a comparison look here. Okay, so here's the fun. Check this out. Notice my EQ curve is very similar. The only difference is that I added this extra input. I turned on this control to cut a little bit of that low frequency up in the 194 hertz range. Over here, I did not. And here, actually, I've cut Ruben -12 at 565 hertz. So, from day to day, whatever your ears are hearing, it could be very different. Audio is very subjective, but, it's all about keeping the sound as natural as possible, but again, bringing out that diamond in the rough. So just for fun, how about I go ahead and bypass this EQ, and we'll just listen to my original EQ on Ruben here.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was...
So that's the old EQ. Here's the new EQ.
Now, here's what I know, Corey. At some point in your life, you realized it was time to wait.
So with the new EQ, notice that he sounds just a little bit thicker, if you will, in his voice there. But again, I had hours to tweak and play with this to come at this final result versus, a couple of minutes with this. And so given time, I probably would have wound up really close to something like this. But that would be boring for you to watch all day, for me to play this back and keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. But of course, that's my life. I love audio. I could sit here and do this and not eat for days, but I won't put you through that. So let's go ahead, keep the video moving forward, and let's take a look at compression. So again, I'm going to come over here to my plugin area. You notice I already have a compressor here. I'm going to go ahead and take this level meter off because we won't need that for this video. Anyway, I'm going to go to the compressor, bring up a fresh compressor. And here's another really, really nice thing. I didn't show you this in the EQ on Studio One. It also has presets, but so does this compressor. And so for me, it's not an end-all be-all to just pick a preset on any of these plugins. But what the preset does is kind of like getting you in the ballpark, but it's going to be up to you to get to home plate, so to speak. So this kind of gives you an idea of how you want to set things depending on what it is that you're trying to compress or EQ or whatever. So if you play with those presets, it kind of gives you a good roadmap or a starting point to kind of figure out what you want to do from there. Now, on the compressor, I'm not going to go through a whole lot of this information here just because I already shot a video 2 or 3 weeks ago. You can go watch that about everything I explain on the compression, about ratio, threshold, knee, input gain, all these knobs. I talk about them in that video. But what I will tell you in short is that a compressor does what its name implies for your audio. It compresses your audio. So if you look at your waveforms up here, let's look at Ruben's waveform because I have the compressor on Ruben's track. You'll notice that this particular waveform right here, and let me just go ahead and expand this a little bit. So how I did that just now, just so you know, is I held the control button on my Windows keyboard and then I just scrolled my mouse up and down. That's how you can make your tracks wider and kind of like a zoom in. And then if you hold shift with control and you roll your mouse, it'll zoom in and out this way. So anyway, let me come back to where I just was because I just lost my spot. Yes, here we are. So notice this waveform. Getting back on topic here, this waveform, and by the way, on the Mac, it's the command button and the 2 finger on the trackpad to do what I just did for zooming in either direction, command and shift or just command. Now, finally, back to what I'm talking about here. Notice this waveform is pretty loud compared to this waveform, right? It's a smaller, so it's a lower level, and then it gets a little louder here again, then it gets a little quieter in this area. That's your waveform. And what a compressor does is you set it so that you can kind of pinch or squeeze these larger waveforms, and it kind of knocks their volume down a little bit so that they're more consistent with the lower volume waveforms. And the reason you want to do that is because if you think about, if you've ever listened to like a homemade recording on a stereo or in a car, you ever wonder why you have to turn those things way up? It's because either they're really, really soft, or then there's parts where they get really, really, really loud, and then you got to turn it down, right? Well, a compressor helps to keep you from having to do that. It makes all of your audio levels nice and consistent, so it makes it an easier listening experience for your audience. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is turn on this compressor, and I'm thinking that my threshold that I want for this one, this preset for threshold really has nothing to do with anything right now, and that's another reason why I say the preset is just a starting point, because PreSonus, the maker of the software, has no clue what kind of audio you're working with. They have no clue how it was recorded, so therefore this threshold means nothing. That's why it's a starting point. So I'm going to go ahead and play this audio back, see what the compressor is doing with the preset, and then I'm going to make some adjustments. So let me go ahead and zoom out, bring this back down a little bit, and let's just play from here.
Daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do. And so for you said,
okay. So for some reason, all of a sudden, my audio is super loud. Let me just bring this down a little bit. Now, I will tell you, don't ever bring down your master fader, but for the purpose of this video and for the sake of time, I am bringing this down just so it's not blowing your ears out.
Daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people...
Hold on a minute. Let me just turn this off.
Daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And
okay, so we lost a little bit of level here. You know what? Let me just open this up and fix this really quick. We're going to get to this plugin next week. But for now, we're going to go ahead and just drop this level a little bit because I saw that compressor kicking in, that limiter kicking in and just smashing the mess out of my audio. Okay, so now let's come back to this compressor.
My daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do. And so for you, you said, "Wait a minute, action speaks."
Okay, so the compressor here is...
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch.
So the compressor here is barely even touching this audio here with Ruben. But what I like to do is get anywhere from -3 to maybe -6 at the most in gain reduction up here with this meter that you see. What this meter is showing you is how much gain reduction is happening when this compressor kicks in. So right now it's coming in about -2, but what I'm going to do is drop this down. I'm going to say about -19. I think that will get me there. I'm not even going to really mess with the ratio. I think the ratio is going to be fine for this. And, oh yeah, you know what? That's the other thing I forgot to do, is I forgot to turn down the auto gain. By the way, that's another thing I want to mention, is I turned this off earlier just because, again, this is the same thing as the output gain on the EQ, where we put some of that volume back that we lost when we cut frequencies. But with gain reduction on the compressor, we need to do the same thing. Now, I've just noticed using my ears that the auto gain correction, or how much volume it puts back when you have this engaged, seems to be more than what the original audio is. So I don't really like to use that on this compressor. I just turn it off, bring it down to 0, and actually that was probably what was slamming my audio earlier. So let me go ahead and bring this back up. Again, we will get to this next week. So anyway, let's bring this compressor back up and listen to this audio now that I've finally figured out what's going on. Sorry about that, guys.
My daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do.
Okay, so there we had -10. So I'm going to bring this up to like -18 for the threshold. Again, the threshold is saying as soon as any audio on Ruben's track reaches -18 decibels and starts to go over, I want you, compressor, to pinch down, clamp down on the audio, keep it from getting too much louder. Okay, now let's play this back here and see what we get.
My daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do. And
so you saw there we were pretty much holding steady at -5, -6 until we got right here where Ruben got nice and loud and that compressor did its job, right? It jumped in and said, nope, not going to get any louder. So then it just kind of jumped in there and seized the opportunity to squeeze this really loud transient that we have here. Now, the other thing we have to listen to is how much of the volume do we have to put back with our output gain. So let's take a listen. I'm going to bypass and unbypass.
My daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do. And so for you, you said, "Wait a minute."
So to me, that sounds right about 1.025. It's not a lot. Again, guys, we're not making huge swing for the fences moves on any of these plugins. You've noticed a lot of the moves I've made, some of them have been kind of big, but not over the top. We don't want to hear the effects. In this case, we don't want to hear the effects working. We want them to be as transparent as possible, keep the voices and the speech as natural sounding as possible. So these are only here to enhance the overall sound, not affect it to the point that you hear an effect.
Daughter.
Exactly. Wow, that's so powerful. And so what you knew is that people don't necessarily listen to what we say; they watch what we do. And so for you, you said, "Wait a minute."
Okay, so I feel really good about that gain addition of 1.25. As I was clicking bypass, I literally heard no difference in the output with or without the compressor. But the difference is that the speech here is more consistent overall in the levels. So what I was able to do by bringing this gain up by 1.25 and using this gain reduction is I kept the loud parts from getting too loud, while at the same time it allowed me to bring up some of the softer parts. So if you notice, what the compressor did was it made all the sound a little bit more even, a little bit more consistent. So that is how you use a compressor at least in this case. There's all kind of different ways to use it, but this is the way that I'm focusing on here for the interview. So that's what I have for you guys in training for this 4-part series. This is part 2, adding EQ and compression to your tracks. We talked about automation last time. Next week, we're going to be talking about ways to sweeten up your audio. And I'm sorry, I lied, but this is going to be in the 4th part of the series. And what that is a limiter, and we will get more into limiting in the final part of the series. But next week, we're going to talk about how we can take this a step further and get the audio sounding that much better. Because right now, it sounds really, really good, but there's still some things that we can do to, again, get it even more of a professional grade. So here's to getting better audio at home, guys. And next week, I hope you come back. The 3rd part's going to be just as fun. Hopefully you learned a lot in this today. Email me if you have any questions. Actually, I'm sorry, email. Facebook, message me on Facebook. Follow me at facebook.com/cleftonegrooves. If you need to license any music, I also have that available at cleftonegrooves.com, as well as if you're looking for any kind of gear for audiobooks or things of that nature, there's also links of information for that as well at cleftonegrooves.com/recording-packages. So there's all kinds of information about how you can get better audio and how you can use some of my music to brand your products if you would like to do that. But again, here's to getting better audio at home. I'm going to get out of here and enjoy my weekend, and hopefully you guys all will too. All right, we'll see you later.